Hello, welcome back. It feels like it's been forever. Just kidding. Um, Hope everyone had a good little 5 minute break there. And I'm going to give a couple of minutes. I have my mocha. Uh, Cheers, everyone. And so I see one person has joined us, and we are continuing on. I want to break the reading aloud of Joseph M. Firestone's book, his ebook, among which he has written 7 on modern money theory. I think a lot of people call it modern monetary theory, but modern money theory, maybe that's what it actually. Anyway, same, right? Um, Anyway, his book is called The One That We're Reading Aloud, in which we're going to read chapter 3 here in just a couple minutes. So if you want to go back afterwards, we started with the preface, and then we read in a separate stream chapter 1. We just finished chapter 2, and we're going to go on to read chapter 3, Fixing the Debt Without Breaking America, Austerity, the $1 trillion coin, and ending debt ceiling, sequester, and budgetary crisis. Okay, and let's see. While we wait, I do want to wait for a couple of minutes for people to potentially get this live stream, get plugged in here to this live stream. So I'm going to wait for just a minute. And I will speak a minute about where I'm at with my current crafting project. I am almost finished with you really can't see this because, but you can kind of see that it has ridges or spokes. But it's a black beret. Here, if I hold it really close, maybe you can actually see. And then as we're getting into reductions here, normally you knit on. Everyone's like, wait a second, I thought we were talking about the debt and you're talking about knitting. Yes, I'm waiting for people that had joined our the live stream before in case they want to join for chapter 3. I'm giving people just a couple of minutes to come back. So normally we knit on a circular needle, but then when you get to the point where I have to go back and I'm going to do a sort of special headband here. Again, you can hardly see here, but it's really cool as we get down to, and so you're doing reductions. This is a case of like purling 2 together, and you keep getting fewer and fewer stitches. So you have to switch to double pointed needles. Otherwise it's stretched over. You can't stretch it over the circular needles. So I'm going to be really excited for this beret is for a really amazing organizer who I met at the DC March for Medicare for All on July 24th. His name's Joe Nice, and he requested a black beret, and he's patiently waiting. So because it's just so interesting that people have not, I'm just wondering if this is not showing up because people have not joined back. And I know we had a couple people who specifically wanted to join the live stream. So not that we need to, I guess people will kind of come in where they, rather than I was thinking about kind of like trying to share this live. I think that was one day ago. This is probably me here. Yep, this is me. So I'm going to share this to Twitter. And just there we go. Just tweet this out and put it in a group so that those people, hello, hi, Dolores. And thank you. I've just kind of talked a little bit of knitting stuff, and also caught everybody up who might be seeing this live stream but who isn't aware what we're doing. And then I had been kind of waiting for a few people of you that I know were watching this to kind of join back up. We don't need to wait for everyone, but I wanted to give a few minutes. Okay. All right, so we are back, and I think I'm going to go ahead and start reading now. And as people can come in where they, and also too, some people might that was 50 minutes of time, and we're right at the point where it could be dinner time for some, or getting late for others, and and this was an impromptu reading, so I certainly don't expect that people can all join in. And if anyone needs to leave, or Dolores, you need to leave, that's all good. Okay. All right, so we're going to start right back in here with chapter 3, that is called some modern money theory truths. Thank you for sharing it to Facebook as well, by the way. Because my main shares are mostly on Twitter, and I probably need to try to get a little bit better to getting back to Facebook or other platforms, but I don't know that I'm going to do that, because Twitter's a lot to kind of manage for me. So many MMT posts and other writings on fiscal responsibility, including my own, focus on the myths of neoliberalism, pointing out why they are myths and developing an alternative MMT perspective in some detail. Offhand, and I may have forgotten something, when I originally wrote this chapter, I couldn't think of a brief positive MMT narrative related to fiscal responsibility containing primarily the truths rather than the myths. So here is that positive narrative. A version of it originally appeared as a post on a number of blogs and received useful criticisms from commenters on those blogs. Where the wording below owes a debt to a commenter, I've provided a hat tip to the commenter, as is customary in certain areas of the blogosphere. What the narrative boils down to is that fiscal responsibility is about the impact of fiscal policy on people. It's not about the old-time religion of its impact on a supposedly limited supply of gold standard-based money, or on the new reconstruction of that religion by the Austarians, which says that it's about the debt to GDP ratio being reduced to an appropriate level. Okay, another sip of my late evening mocha. Weird. An MMT fiscal responsibility narrative. The first 7 points in the narrative offer some conclusions. Austerity requiring budget surpluses cannot work in the United States economy because surpluses, defined as tax revenue exceeding spending, I think I just want to start out because I feel like I already kind of missed that. So, an MMT fiscal responsibility narrative. The first 7 points in the narrative offer some conclusions. Austerity requiring budget surpluses cannot work in the United States economy because surpluses, defined as tax revenue exceeding spending, destroy money in the private sector. Unless these financial assets are replaced through revenues acquired by running a trade surplus, the continuous loss of financial assets by the private sector is unsustainable, eventually leading to credit bubbles, recession, or depression, and the return of deficit spending. It is mathematically impossible for the U.S. to simultaneously run a government surplus, have a trade deficit, and increase aggregate private sector financial wealth. Okay. It is fiscally irresponsible to frame and follow a long-term deficit reduction plan, limited austerity, when both a trade deficit and an output gap exists, because by definition, such a plan is one that must remove more money from the economy than would otherwise be the case. Every year the plan is pursued. that would be the case every year the plan is pursued. Eventually, if pursued for long enough, a declining rate of addition to net financial assets will exacerbate the output gap by lowering aggregate demand and causing both labor and capital to deteriorate, thus reducing the productive capacity of the economy and the government's ability to sustain greater levels of deficit spending, producing outputs of real social value without triggering inflation. Real fiscal responsibility is a pattern of fiscal policy intended to achieve public purposes, such as full employment, price stability, a first class educational system, Medicare for all, etc., while also maintaining or increasing fiscal sustainability, viewed as the extent to which patterns of government spending do not undermine the capability of the government to continue to spend to achieve its public purposes. Hello again. Real fiscally responsible policy, if it works generally as expected, creates greater real benefits than real costs for people. It has nothing to do with conforming to some standard, simple financial measure like an acceptable debt to GDP ratio that has only a questionable theoretical connection to the actual well being of people. It is political, fiscal, and economic malpractice to give greater priority to that kind of abstraction than to full employment, price stability, a strong social safety net, and government programs that will help us solve the many outstanding problems of our nation. Let's put an end to the domination of Washington by that kind of malpractice. Let's put an end to the current misguided, fiscally irresponsible campaign to promote a grand bargain that is sure to do nothing but destroy more private sector money and jobs that would be the case if we either did nothing or increased the deficit and created a full employment budget. Social Security has no solvency or running out of money problems. The Social Security crisis is a phony one. No solution to this fiscal crisis, bipartisan or partisan, is needed. What is needed is a solution to the political problem of getting Social Security's funding guaranteed in perpetuity by Congress, just the way it guarantees funding from Medicare Parts B and D. The same applies to the so-called Medicare crisis. It too is phony and can be solved easily by Congress guaranteeing funding in perpetuity to Medicare Parts A and C. More generally, there is no entitlement funding crisis in the United States except a political crisis where U.S. politicians are determined to ignore their constituents and cut back on an already inadequate safety net, either because they believe in or want others to believe in false ideas about fiscal responsibility and the government as a giant household. Oh, I'm sorry. That's just not funny, but it's. I am enjoying this. I had a lot of thoughts with that. It just brought up a lot of imagery. I think the government is a giant household. The rest of the MMT narrative provides the reasoning underlying these conclusions. The U.S. government can't involuntarily run out of its own fiat money, U.S. dollars, since it has the constitutional authority to create it without limit. Congress constrains and regulates this ability, but its existence is still a stubborn fact of the Constitution. Greece and Ireland are users of the euro, not issuers of it, so their supply is always limited, and that's why they can run out of euros. The US is the issuer of dollars, so its supply of dollars is limited only by its desire to create them and its ability to mark up private accounts, and that's why it can't become Greece, Ireland, or any other Eurozone nation. In addition to taxing and borrowing money, the government, including the combined activities of the Congress and the Treasury and the Federal Reserve, has an unlimited capacity to create it. When it taxes and borrows, the government removes money from the private sector and destroys it. When it creates money in the process of spending, it adds it to the private sector. A deficit is the net amount of money creation minus the amount of destruction due to taxation. I feel like I would need to read that again. When it creates money in the process of spending, it adds it to the private sector. A deficit is the net amount of money creation minus the amount of destruction due to taxation. A surplus is the net amount of money destruction minus the amount of creation due to government spending. And he's referenced golfer John. Oh. Okay. Since this is the case, it's clear that proposals to reduce the deficit by an average of 400 billion a year over the next 10 years are sure to remove money or treasury securities, assuming deficit spending is accompanied by issuing debt from the private sector that otherwise would have been added to it in the absence of deficit reduction. The government of the United States offers the functional equivalent of interest-bearing savings accounts to investors, usually wealthy individuals, large corporations, and foreign nations. The savings accounts are usually called U.S. Treasury securities, and the sum of their face values is called the debt subject to the limit, or more colloquially, the national debt, even though comparable savings accounts in banks are for some reason not called bank debt, even though they are, from an accounting perspective, liabilities. The Treasury can keep accepting deposits, borrowing money, and issuing securities if we want it to. There's no limit on this government credit card, just as there is no limit to the deposits a bank can accept, except the one imposed arbitrarily by Congress in the form of the amount of debt subject to the limit, otherwise known as the debt ceiling. So if the U.S. does run out of money due to a failure to raise the debt ceiling, it will clearly be the fault of the Congress for refusing to grant further authority to the Treasury to elicit and accept further deposits, also known as refusing to raise the debt ceiling. Even though it may seem that foreign nations can place a limit on, quote, the national credit card by refusing to buy Treasury securities at auction, foreign nations holding dollars basically have a choice between continuing to hold them and earning no income, or earning interest on them by buying securities. So as long as other nations are exporting to the US and accepting dollars as payments, those dollars are likely to be invested in the interest-bearing savings accounts known as Treasury securities. Bond markets don't control US interest rates. The Federal Reserve Bank does by exercising its authority to meet its target interest rates. Bond vigilantes have no power against the Fed. If they fight against its interest rate targets by trying to bid them up, they will die in the flood of reserves the Fed can unleash to drive the interest rates down to its chosen target. The Fed can't control the money supply because the banks create deposits when they make loans, but it does control the price of money with its interest rate targeting. The bond markets will buy U.S. debt as long as we keep issuing it. But if one insists on considering the hypothetical case where the markets won't, the U.S. would still not be forced into insolvency because the government can always create the money needed to meet all U.S. obligations. The U.S. is obligated by Section 4 of the 14th Amendment to pay all its debts as they come due. Nevertheless, our national debt cannot be a burden on our grandchildren unless they wish to make it so by stupidly taxing more than they spend. This is true because assuming the debt ceiling is raised when needed or repealed, we have an unlimited credit card to incur new debt at interest rates of our choosing. So if we can roll over our national debt, indefinitely. Or alternatively, we can create all the money we need to pay off the debt subject to the limit without ever incurring any more debt. One way to do this is through platinum coin oh my gosh, I just don't know how to say this word. It kind of bothers me, but seigniorage. Seigniorage. A second way is through subordinating the Fed to Treasury and then using the Fed's ability to create money out of thin air to pay back all debt instruments, savings account balances when they fall due. The first way is legal now. The second is constitutional, but would require politically unlikely action by Congress to authorize it. A fiscal policy that measures its success or failure in reducing deficits rather than by its impacts on public purpose is fiscally irresponsible and unsustainable. The deficit is a meaningless measure from the viewpoint of government solvency because the US government has no limits on its authority to create, spend money other than self imposed ones. So neither the level of the national debt nor the debt to GDP ratio can affect the government's capacity to spend congressional appropriations at all. Also, a deficit debt oriented fiscal policy ignores real outcomes relating to employment, price stability, economic growth, environmental impact, crime rates, civil strife and violence, etc., which actually can affect fiscal sustainability by strengthening or weakening the underlying economy, and with it, the legitimacy of the government and its fiat currency. In short, responsible fiscal policy is not about its impact on government debt, it's about its impact on people. The federal government is not like a household. Households can't make their own currency and require that people use that currency to pay taxes. So their supply of dollars is always limited, while the government's supply is a matter of its decisions alone. However large the federal debt becomes, it cannot be a crushing burden on our government because federal spending is virtually costless to the government if it wants it to be. Seigniorage. Okay, thank you, Joe. Yeah, seigniorage. Uh, right, conclusion. Current claims that we have a fiscal crisis must debate the debt, must fix the debt, and must immediately embark on a long term deficit reduction program to bring the debt to GDP ratio under control all misconceive the fiscal situation and smack of a campaign to create public hysteria. They are based on the idea that fiscal responsibility is about developing a plan to bring the debt to GDP ratio under control, when it is really about using government spending to achieve outputs that fulfill public purpose. There is no fiscal crisis that will require a grand bargain, including cuts to popular discretionary spending and entitlement programs. It is a phony crisis. The only real crises are the only real crises are one of a failing stagnant economy with growing economic inequality, in which only the needs of the few are served, while the needs of the many are ignored, and also one of lack of political desire or will to solve these real problems. MMT policies can help to bring an end to the first economic crisis, but not if progressives and others continue to believe in false ideas about fiscal sustainability and responsibility and the similarity of their government to a household. To begin to solve our problems, we need to reject the neoliberal narrative and embrace the MMT narrative about the meaning of fiscal responsibility. That will lead us toward the action we need to solve the political crisis and eventually toward fiscal policies that achieve public purpose and away from policies that prolong economic stagnation, economic inequality, and the ravages of austerity. Okay, that was only 24 minutes because I think this chapter or that section was just a little bit shorter than the one prior. Yeah, so let's pause. Let's have that be. Did you? Let me think if Joe is here and paying attention. No, I don't think I have any questions right now. I don't need to kind of make a thing of making some questions. Thank you to everyone for joining. And I really appreciate. Yes. Well, I changed my mind. I don't really have any uh, pressing questions, but I might, you know, write some down if I have them. Or I guess I just want to comment that it's always been the case with me, like going back to studying, the theory of things that I've studied in my time, like uh, biodynamic massage, which has and body psychotherapy and craniosacral therapy. Um, I I find like I can read things and they can even make sense to me to a pretty great degree. And then I also feel like if you tried to ask me, like give me a quiz on what I just read, I think one of the only I don't know, you'd have to make the questions really simple, and I feel like the only thing I could repeat is the federal government is not like a household, and that so many of these things, the way that we're conditioned to believe, are well, let's see, that the only real fiscal sustainability and responsibility is about public purpose. Our goal should be public purpose. I don't know. I think I've probably retained a lot, but it's just something where I feel like I could literally read stuff over and over, and it doesn't stick in my brain, which is always it's just been a frustrating thing. But I think the point is that I'm out here willing to kind of read about it and make an attempt to learn and share the resources. And I feel like it's one of the things that we do is there's an incredible amount of resources. I mean, this is like, excuse me, there's like years worth of work here on Joe Firestone's website, and to use an example, recently that Kenny Ballantyne came to Tacoma to to do some filming for his documentary he's working on, healthcare.movie. And, you know, um, that was like about an hour and 15 minutes of a, yeah, I am liking it, but I'm like, after this, I'm going to go listen to that because, again, I'm not, I am liking it. I'm not finished with it yet. So, um, but I'll give you more comments on that on the next live stream, Joe. And yeah, I guess I think I will end up, when all is said and done. I wonder if I would have really paid attention. Maybe I needed people to be. Um, Sometimes we need a motivator. I think that I'm having to sort of take a very close look at all of this, because of the uh, things that have been levied sort of against the Red Berets. Like, we're not serious we're not serious, and I don't need to get too much into that, but I want to believe that if somebody would have just nudged me and said, "Hey, this is extremely important, and we need your help, like spreading this messaging," that may not, and probably, if I'm honest, wouldn't have been the same motivating factor as feeling that if I didn't begin to take this seriously, and as I said before, plenty of Red Berets have over time do know much more about MMT than what I know, and also have encouraged me to share and amplify Stephanie Kelton on Twitter during the time that Bernie was running, during the primary. Lisa Theobald and I made a project of that, where we amplified her for a few days. And we did that with different Twitter accounts. Warren Gunnels, of course, we amplified him a lot. So again, it's not something and people can check the receipts. Like if they really, I don't know if you can go that far back in time with Twitter, but it certainly is not. Amber, yeah, absolutely. Amber, has long been a very is a whole Washington volunteer, and has been super supportive, and has been a mutual of mine on Twitter. We've been mutuals for a long time, and she has shared Red Berets stuff, and so you know we've named all of these people. So it by no means are Red Berets like even a lot of us, many of us are. We do have there is a number of people who have some basis in MMT, or have done some learning about it. So uh, yeah, but I don't like it when things feel contentious. And of course, I would love it if everybody could just kumbaya and kind of all come together and agree that, everybody that's contributing to the field of uh, achieving healthcare justice is, we're all working in solidarity and in service to that. And we don't actually know what the outcome is. We don't know how we're going to get there. We have strategies and we're continuing, thank you again, Joe, for inviting so many wonderful people that have been affiliated with Red Berets over time, and working with us to develop this fight on all fronts, multi-pronged approach. But it may be the case that because I did tell myself, yeah, on one level, in general, to the movement, not everybody needs to be, an economic expert and needs to be even a policy expert. We are activists. We all have limited time in what we can apply ourselves to. This beret that is for one amazing activist, you can probably see this is, and it's because it's not a complicated pattern, it's a bit of a time consuming pattern, and it's hours of work, and this is the work that I do. So there's been a bit of a kind of pushback or a defensiveness like towards people that have been it's kind of like, well, have you knit 350 red berets for the Medicare for All solidarity, or gone out and gathered signatures? And why am I expected to be, and why am I expecting myself to be the Medicare for All organizing jack of all trades? So there's that, but there's also, oh, well, MMT is super important, and I can take, certainly with all of the nonsense, and some of it's nonsense and some of it's really good organizing. If you use social media and Twitter as purposeful ways of connecting and organizing, it can be very focused and not just BS and nonsense. But certainly, if I have plenty of time for that kind of stuff, I can take some hours to learn about MMT. So, thank you very much to everyone who joined, and have a good night, everyone. I don't know when I'm going to do the next chapter. I can say that I very well might do one tomorrow, and then Wednesday will almost be a definite thing. We'll just have to see, because on my days that I work, there's quite a bit already. So we'll just take it day by day, and if some of you catch it and we're able and it lines up, that's great. And if not, then I'll just share it when I've done it. And it's great to see you all here. Thanks for sharing it out. Really appreciate you all. Okay, have a good night.